Hey, so this is a really important session. I'm going to teach you how to understand type 1 and type 2 errors, the two most common errors you're going to see in your search, understand how to diagnose them, and what you should do about them now going forward. So you're definitely going to want to watch this closely and carefully and follow along with your search. If you haven't already done your search and feel good about your basic search in one of the databases that you're going to ultimately end up using, then you're not ready for this video and you need to go back and do that. Okay, so with that, let me go over to a whiteboard and cover for you how you can think about your search. The way I think about searching is kind of like throwing your net out to sea, kind of like you're going fishing. You're throwing out a net and you want to catch fish. Say you want to catch tuna. And when you're trying to catch tuna, when you're fishing, there's one of two main errors that can happen. One is you're looking for tuna and you throw out your net, you pull it back up, and what you find is, lo and behold, you got a whole bunch of sea bass or flounder or lobster or something else. It might be really tasty, but it's not what you want in your net. So this is sometimes called a type 1 error or a false positive. This language about type 1 and type 2 errors develops from diagnostic criteria, often around tests. I'm going to come to that later. So the first kind of problem is you get stuff in your net that you don't want. The second kind of problem that we're going to be dealing with is you throw out your net, you want to catch tuna, and you actually missed some of the tuna that you wanted. Maybe the tuna were small and they were able to slip away and wriggle through holes in the net. So here is a second kind of problem where you've missed tuna that you actually wanted. This is called a type 2 error or a false negative. You did your search and your search says, nope, no tuna there, but you actually wanted it. Now you're going to have different ways of dealing with these types of errors. Of these two, which do you think is the most problematic? Take a second to think about it, because it's not entirely obvious. Well, at this stage, what's going to be the most important is the type 2 error. That's because the sea bass issue is a little bit easier to deal with, because you can say, I see a bunch of sea bass in my net, I can just throw these back to sea and pick them out one by one. And you can do that picking out one by one next week when we move on to inclusion, exclusion. Now, that's not a hard and fast rule. If you do your search and you find, oh, well, I threw out my net and I have 99% sea bass and there's a tuna buried in there somewhere, you're going to spend a lot of time throwing out sea bass like looking for a needle in a haystack trying to find where the tuna is. In which case you need to do something to deal with the type 1 errors. So I'm going to be more concrete. We're going to do a live example of dealing with this. But what we really want to focus on right now are the optimizing the type 2. So let me go back to our search that we were doing before on poverty and HIV. And let me show you what this concretely means. So we have our search from before here with 50 results. And if we go through and we just eyeball this, we can start to see, just at a glance, the type 1 errors. Remember, we can't see the type 2 errors because they wriggled through our net, so they're not here. We're going to have a test for that in a second. But if you look here, we can see, okay, tuberculosis, social determinants, comorbidities, that doesn't really look like it's what we want. Remember, our PICO linking sentence was the impact of poverty on HIV treatment outcomes. So that's probably out. Here's another one, leishmaniasis. That's not about HIV treatment outcomes. That's out. Macronutrient supplementation, HIV patients during treatment. That could be interesting. We kind of need to hold and think about that, if that could be relevant. HIV and tuberculosis co-infection among migrants, looking at unsuccessful treatment outcomes and deprivation. Yeah, I think that's possible that it could be in. Translational activities to enable NTD vaccines, that's going to be out. Socioeconomic disparity of immunologic outcome, that looks like it's right on the money. It's looking at socioeconomic differences. Poverty, here's another one, HIV-related stigma, psychological adjustment. That's looking pretty good on the money. So what I'm seeing in my search, I want you to go through the first 20, just extend your results here, and begin to quantify, of these first 20, what percentage look like type 1 errors to you? If you're getting some 90, 95% type 1 errors, you're just getting a whole bunch of noise in your search. And you probably are going to need to go back and revisit your search to avoid getting that noise. How can you do that? So, for example, coming back to our search example that we had before, maybe if you operationalize poverty with a word like, don't know, health expenditure, or a word that might not be so relevant and is getting a whole bunch of noise, if you look closely at the articles that are showing up in your search, but you actually don't want them, if you start seeing some commonalities as to what is a word for poverty that's coming into my search that I don't actually want, you might be able to prune that off your search strategy. So the way you're going to try to deal with this is you're going to take your search term and one by one start eliminating terms and then see what happens. So for example, if I felt that it looks to me like socioeconomic status is creating some problems for me, I can add this to the query. I'm just going to prune that and I'm going to take out this socioeconomic status term because I think that keyword variant could have been triggering a lot of false positives. So let me take those out. And be very careful doing this, that you don't throw off your whole search, because there you can see there's a lot going on with the Boolean logic. You need to sustain the Boolean logic the way it's supposed to be, or you're going to get really messy results. So here I can see that reduced to 34. Maybe I didn't really need that term. You're going to go back, look over it, and make sure that you maybe have gotten rid of some of the noise, but you haven't lost the articles that you really want. You need to be really careful when dealing with these type 1 errors that you're not throwing the baby out with the bathwater. You want the baby, you don't want the bathwater. You throw too much out and you've lost the baby. So really important you do this one variant at a time. And this is where the advanced builder is going to help you, because you can see what effect that has on the numbers of your search. Okay, to diagnose that this is working well, we now need a way to detect type 2 errors. We can't see this in our search because they're missing. This is where Google Scholar is going to come in handy. So I'm going to open up a new tab here and go into Google Scholar. And now I want to search impact of HIV on poverty treatment outcomes. And here what I want to do is I want you to identify about 5 articles that, just on looking at it quickly, you think this should be in. This meets all the elements of your PICO, the population, the intervention comparison outcome, and you think it should be in. We're going to use that to say these are things that should be in there. We're now going to go back and test and see if these are actually in our search. So here's one. So the best thing to do here in Google Scholar, you just click on Cite, copy it over, and create a Word document with this. So I'm going to put this in a Word document. I'm going to come back here, and I'm going to do the same thing for a few of these that I can find. Okay, antiretroviral treatment outcomes, that looks interesting. This looks like it could be valuable. I'm going to put this here. Okay, let's keep going. Here's another one, Ryan White. And there's another just below it, food insecurity and poverty indicators and people living with HIV. So let me just copy all these over to a document. I want you to get 5. I'm not going to go through it all now, but let's copy these over. And the worksheets are going to help you. The worksheets are going to ask you to do exactly this step by step, so you know that you're doing it right. So now I've got 5. Now I want to go through and see, is this in my search? There are different ways you can do this. You've got the nuts and bolts of your search. I want to add another keyword effectively that's going to identify this article so I can see if it's in there. So you could just take from the title, poverty stigma associated with suboptimal HIV care. You could put authors' names. I like using the title. I just think that that's particularly simple and straightforward. So let's come back, put our search here, add query. We're going to put and I'm going to put quotes and quote what was in the title there. And let's go ahead and add to the history and see if we get it. Aha, there's one result, and that should be the article if it's there. Perfect. So we feel confident that we captured this article that we should have captured. Our search did well on that. Let's do it with the next article. So here we go. Antiretroviral treatment outcomes from a nurse driven. Let's just take that first clause. It should be enough to identify the article. Put this in here. Okay. Add to history, and it's not there. This tells us we have a potential type 2 error. I say potential for a reason. I'm going to come back to that. So I'm just going to put an X next to this and a missing next to this article that I don't have it. Same thing. Let's try the Ryan White HIV/AIDS program, this article here. I'm going to come back to my search and do the same thing and pop it in. And this. Inside the history, that one's not there. So this is also missing. And then I'm going to do one more and take this article food insecurity and other poverty indicators. And let's come back to the original search. Again, this is why this advanced functionality is absolutely indispensable. And this one is also not in there. So look, I'm seeing for my search, I've got a lot of holes in the net that I need to potentially shore up. What we need to do is look closely at each of these articles to see, because we need to make a judgment then of what could happen. Based on our whiteboard, let me clear this off. You have three possibilities, three judgments that you can make at this stage of a potential type 2 error. So what you can have happen is, one is you decide that this article actually should not have been in, that it wasn't a real type 2 error, should not have been in. Maybe you look too quickly at Google Scholar, it shouldn't be a part of it. And so what you're going to do is emphasize, you're going to update later on your inclusion-exclusion criteria to define that this is, make sure that this really shouldn't be in. And this was not, based on your search, a type 2 error. Other possibility, you're now going to look for a keyword variant to include that would have captured the article. And then you're going to update your search to make sure it's there. And option number 3 thing that can happen is maybe it's just not there because it's not in your database. So you need to check that. And then you have a decision to make of whether you want to extend to look for additional databases, or you're going to be happy with your inclusion exclusion criteria to say that, look, it wasn't in these databases, that's fine. I'm happy with that because I only search these databases. Now, if that's happening in the case of a few articles, that's probably perfectly okay. If you're finding a big chunk of missing information, that's a problem. You probably need to update your databases. So you're going to you're going to update your search, or you're going to make sure it's just clearly set out in your inclusion exclusion criteria. You have a choice here. Again, we're spending a lot of time on these type 2 errors because they're really quite important. So let's operationalize this and go look at those articles that we missed and see what we should do about them. So let's come back to Google Scholar, and let's take, for example, this article. We need to now look in this article in detail to see if we think it should have been in. So let's see if we can find anything. You're just scanning it quickly that says anything about how poverty could impact on HIV treatment outcomes. And I'm scanning through it, and I'm looking here, and I'm not seeing, on very quick brush, I'm not seeing any evidence reported on poverty impacting treatment outcomes. So this article, we're going to come back and say, actually, it's not missing. This was not supposed to be there in the first place. This doesn't count. It doesn't have the data we really need. It's not a type 2 error. That's helpful. That's that first possibility. Actually should not have been in. No problem. Okay. Let's look at another one. The Ryan White HIV Program Assistance and Treatment Outcomes. Let's go to that article. And here we go. I have that. Where is that? Should be here. Let's take a look. And I see a lot about poverty. And this looks like poverty in another name. Let's look at the abstract and see. We assessed associations of this antiretroviral therapy in adults, and it looks like here, uninsured patients compared. So, looks like this has captured deprivation with uninsured. This is an opportunity then, if we believe this article should be in, to go back to our search, update it, and add in the missing term. So let's add this to the query and come back here again, being very, very careful how we do this. Add, so we want to add, say, uninsured, and we'll use the same syntax, title and abstract here, or let's go ahead and add it to the history. So you can see before we had 34 articles, now we've got 39, and let's repeat our type 2 test to see if this got it. And Ryan White, let's just see if that comes up now. And this actually has 2. Again, but here we go. The article that we wanted is here. So by updating our keyword variants, we're confident we've eliminated this type 2 error. It's now in our search. Again, you have to make a judgment call because there is a tug of war between type 1 and type 2 errors. And you can see how this works now. as you get rid of type 2 errors by expanding your net, you can start inflating massively, if you're not careful, the number of type 1 errors that you get. And similarly, you start taking out and pruning your tree, getting rid of type 1 errors, you can start increasing type 2 errors. This step, there's not a hard and fast rule. You're going to have to work on it and pay very close attention to do this to optimize your search. This is not a simple step because it's going to vary a lot depending on your search, what is going to optimize it. Okay, so then let's go to one more article just to make this really clear. So let's look at this food insecurity one. My suspicion on this is going to be that we probably need a term about food insecurity here. But let's go back and look at our search. I need to come here to the actual article and see what's going on. This has poverty, so it seems like poverty is not the issue. Let's see what could be missing and why this was missing. Okay, so poor ART adherence. So it could be that we need adherence and that we're missing this because we're not capturing, we've got poverty, we've got HIV/AIDS, and we've got treatment outcomes. So it should be there. So let's check, we need to check, is it actually in the database? So how can we do that? Let's go to our advanced builder and just search for it and make sure it's in the database. How can we do that? Well, let's just pop in the title. That's probably the simplest way. And let's add to the history and see. It is in the PubMed database. So it's not an issue of this not being in the database. It is an issue that our keyword variants have not captured it. Because I can see HIV is here, and I can see poverty is here, the only word that it might not be catching this very well is treatment outcomes. So what I can see here is adherence. That looks like a good word. So what I want to go do is now update my term for treatment outcomes, which we used a mesh term. Obviously that mesh term was not perfect. I'm going to add this to query. I'm going to update this term, or adherence. So let's add this to the history and let's update our search. You can see that's brought us from 1.1 million to 1.3 million. So now we need to build back up our search with this new updated keyword variant. And let's see if I can go and get our nuts and bolts back. So here, and oops, come back to our socioeconomic status. Sometimes you have to dig pretty far back to get everything. Add this at the end and add to the history, and let's see what we get now. Now it's gone up a lot. We've got 402. And everything's been popped in correctly. So let's test it though. Let's add this to the query to make sure we get or this and add this. Whoops, that's not what I wanted. Let's add this to the article here with and see if we get it. And this time we can say yes. By making this adjustment to our keyword variants, we are getting this article. This is the flow of what you're going to need to do to balance the type 1 and type 2 errors. It's very possible now, as you can see, we went from 39 articles to 400. We've increased the type 1 errors quite a bit. You want to do the best you can to get these type 2 errors down without ending up with too many articles. Again, a rule of thumb that I want you to stick with is your ideal scenario is that you're going to have more than 30, but you're going to have less than 1,000 at this stage. You want to be in this ballpark. If you end up with thousands and thousands, it's going to be too much to go through during inclusion, exclusion, too many CBAS to throw back, and we're not going to see you for a while. So, it's going to vary by your field, but if you're anywhere between, say, 600 and 800, that's a really nice number for this stage. Again, not a hard and fast rule. If you're too few, you're going to run out of articles and just not going to have enough to write about, not enough to justify doing a systematic review on just 3 articles. So that's about the sweet spot. The last thing I want to close with is I want to give you a framework additionally to really hammer home this message about type 1, type 2 errors. And so I want to create a 2x2 table. So should you get the article? And you can imagine yes or no. Okay. And then do you actually get the article? Do you get it in your search? Again, yes or no. What we're dealing with is should we get it and we get it, that's good. That's what we want. Should you get it no and you don't get it, that's good. That's what we want. The errors we're dealing with here are should you get it? No, and you actually get it. That is a type 1. Should you get it and you don't actually get it? That is our type 2. And I just want to emphasize this for you. The way you can think about this is sometimes think about a coronavirus test. If you are actually positive for coronavirus, you take a test and the test comes out negative, that is a false negative. It's a type 2 error. That's pretty bad. That could lead to a super spreader event. Just want to give you that framework to think about because the type 2 errors have potentially worse implications right now in your search than the type 1, because the type 1 we can deal with later. In exclusion, we just want to make sure we don't have an overwhelming number of them, and we want to minimize as best possible these type 2 errors using that Google Scholar test that I just set out. The worksheets are going to make this simple and clear for you to do going forward. It's going to take you step by step and break down exactly what you've just seen here is exactly what you need to do for the worksheets. Again, we're available. We have support. Drop us a line, get in touch with us to make sure that this is crystal clear to you on what you need to do to optimize your search at this stage, because we want to finalize the search before moving on to the next week, where we're going to start wading through the articles, going through screening and eligibility to decide what's going to make the final cut in our final set of articles to analyze and write about. Again, if you follow these steps, you're going to avoid the type 2 errors where reviewers come back and say, but you didn't have this article that I wrote that's tremendously important, and be a cause for getting your paper rejected. Again, trust the process, follow these steps, and you're going to have a smooth, easy ride to completion. All right, look forward to seeing you in the next week.